I was kind of more fresh on the scene, and I had the energy because I felt
Yeah.
we could do it. And really, John, I had little room to fail. It couldn't get much worse.
Welcome to the Freedom Experience. I'm your host, Jean Moncrief. Today, I'm talking to Glen Dall about what he terms the CEO doom loop. It's a destructive cycle where CEOs and business owners find themselves trapped in fear and poor decision making. And Glen shares his firsthand experience of turning around Insignia, a publicly traded company, and how he recognized the early signs of slipping into this doom loop, like micromanaging and lack of accountability. We're going to explore why identifying these early warning signs is crucial for any CEO, the importance of building a strong leadership team, and the roles of sales effectiveness in breaking free from the doom loop. Plus, we'll discuss the immense value of surrounding yourself with a supportive network of trusted advisors and coaches. Glen, welcome to the Freedom Experience. It's great to have you on the show. Thanks very much for the time. And let's kick off with, tell us a little bit about your background, your story, how you landed up being a CEO.
All right. Thanks, John. I appreciate you having me on, and it's always great chatting with you. We've had a lot of good discussions in the past. So I got my start early on in my life. When I graduated high school, I started working on an assembly line, helping to build Ford Broncos, which I always start my story off that way because my corporate career started there and ended up many years later being the CEO of a publicly traded company. It was a company that was traded on the NASDAQ. And it's one of those stories, I think many people's are, that's taken many twists and turns, but it's one of the things I never ever envisioned myself. Once I was seated in the big chair in the corner office as a CEO, I'd never envisioned I would be there. And I had just about no idea what I should be doing as a CEO.
See, you started out in Detroit, right?
I did. Yes.
So born in Detroit, grew up in Detroit. And
I
then
did.
landed up working on the floor in, was it Ford? Or
Yeah, it was a Ford Motor Company plant. Yeah, I worked my way up through the automotive industry. I was a test driver for Jeep, which was a really great job. Lots of fun. I know you've ridden in my Jeep when you were here, right?
Yeah, and I've started collecting the ducks. They're over on the shelf.
Oh, I see. Great. You started. I thought about you this weekend. We collected a few more ducks for our Jeep.
So it was started and test driving Jeeps, and that's where where your career began.
Yeah. It was my career began, and actually one of the things that these are the things that always the setbacks in life are things that really can change your life. And as you and I we've heard Dr. Benjamin Hardy speak, some of those things can maybe lead to some 10x events that at the time we don't see them. One thing that happened to me when I was working in the automotive industry, I got offered a really, really great promotion. And it was in marketing and future product planning. And I loved cars and I loved Jeeps. And I got offered this really great job that was snatched away from me once they learned I did not have a college degree because I hadn't gone to college when I left high school. And
so you actually get this job and then it's taken away because you never finished that.
I didn't get the job. I got offered the job by someone who knew me that said, Glenn, you'd be perfect. And he said, well, of course you have a degree, right? And the corporation required at that level that one have a college degree. I didn't. And so he had to say, oh, well, you would have been great in this job. And that really got me thinking, and it really spurred me on to ultimately make a decision that I left that job and I went to college full time. And so I emerged 3 years later with my bachelor's degree in marketing and went into a whole different industry. I actually went into food marketing, which one of my college professors had said something, Glenn, it's really great to be in automotive. It's fun. But when times are tough, people don't need to buy another car. They can usually keep driving the same car for a few more years, but they always need to eat. So that spurred me on.
So you move into the food industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually
Detroit
went
as
to
well. Or?
work. Yeah, Detroit. Yeah, I actually was going to go to work for Procter and Gamble and had several job offers from them and really great company. I ended up getting and accepting a job with a local company that was a supplier to Procter and Gamble, and run by a CEO who had worked at Procter and Gamble, so it had instilled many of the same business practices that Procter and Gamble used into that business. It was a private company at that point in time. It was around 400 million in revenue, and I ended up staying there for 19 years. I did a lot of what I would call now entrepreneurial roles within the company. I would work at startups and new ventures. I ended up traveling from Detroit to Minneapolis to Cleveland, Ohio, to Germany, and then kind of all over Europe for a couple of years as part of that company. But after 19 years, the company had changed a lot. I learned a lot about, we had grown from that 400 million, become publicly traded. So we've been sold on the market and achieved somewhere around 2.4 billion in annual revenue. So grown to be quite a different company. Had a different CEO, and the culture was just radically different. So I decided I wanted to potentially look for something else.
And is this what leads you? I mean, I'm curious, how did you land up becoming the CEO of a publicly traded company?
Yeah, it is an interesting story. So I worked as a function of my role. I worked with the management of a company in the similar space, but it was a much, much smaller company. It was based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and ended up in a conversation with the CEO of that company at a happy hour, and ended up in a conversation about succession planning. And I was just kind of curious about how he was structuring his company. And he ended up offering me a job at his company with the ultimate goal of replacing him as CEO. He said he admired my work and me and my knowledge of the industry, and felt that I could potentially have that job. And a few years later, I did.
There you go.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I moved over. Yeah.
was there a transition that went pretty smoothly? How did you're sitting at the bar? Hey, Glenn, I'd
Yeah.
love you to come in
No,
and
no,
take
it
over.
didn't. You're right. Make it sound really easy. No, it wasn't easy at all. Like, nothing is. The company actually had, we were in a lawsuit with a major competitor that had been going on for years and years. And that was really one of the things I learned as I came in to this new company. I came in, I can't remember, it was like vice president of business development. It was like, the prince in waiting or something. And but we were in this phase of this lawsuit with another company in the industry. And one of the things I really observed over the next probably 12 to 18 months, as someone who hadn't worked at this company for long, right, came in, everybody who had been in the company and had been through this long, brutal process of this lawsuit or series of lawsuits that went over 8 or 10 years, they'd gotten really emotional about the lawsuit, about this competitor. And one of the things I observed, my observation was, is they really weren't focused on the business of the business. It really, in the business model, actually success, and a lot of people were buying the stock because they really believed that this company, my company I was working with, would prevail in the lawsuit, get a huge settlement, and that would increase the value of the company and increase the value of their stock, and everybody would get rich.
So what had happened there? They got too caught up in what was going on in the lawsuit to focus on where the business was actually going.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And the business had, Jean, the business had shrunk by almost half.
Wow.
And a lot of that could be attributed to the competitor, because the competitor, the lawsuit alleged anti-competitive practices.
Okay.
And there are some things there. At the same time, I really think there was too much focus put on them and that condition versus this company. It was a really good company. It had a really good product, had a pretty unique product, had some good customer relationships. But yeah, I think to that point, I think the management had really lost focus and really gotten emotional around the lawsuit. And it also got really tired, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very wearing, and everything and really did revolve around the lawsuit and when we were going to court. And I think the business has suffered because of that.
So you come into a business that's suffering. Is there a leadership team in place at the moment it, what sort of state is it in when you come in? Because obviously at some point you decide to take the helm.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious about what
Yeah.
state it's in when you come
Well,
in.
no, you're right. There was a leadership team, and but the as we progressed, we ended up going to court, but
Okay.
ended up settling pretty quickly, and the settlement amount was nowhere near what had been predicted. The outcome of the lawsuit. Also, the planned outcome for the lawsuit was that all the competitors' contracts would become null and void, and the playing field would be a level
Kind
playing
of
field.
leveled out, right? Okay.
It didn't happen. So that didn't happen. Company was a weird war. We settled. We got a fair amount of money. Of course, the attorneys got rich. The government got a lot
As
of
they do.
money. Shareholders got a lot of money. Company, we retained some of that cash, fortunately, because at that point, the business was hemorrhaging cash
Okay.
because, in my opinion, we hadn't focused enough on the business. So there was
Yeah, I
a
can imagine.
transition period of working through this settlement agreement, and ended up. It was during that point in time that I was the one really working on the settlement agreement with the competitor, and then at that point was when I was asked to really start taking over the company as a COO, and then as president, and then as a CEO.
Ultimately. And the
Yeah.
company was publicly traded already, or publicly trading already, or
Yes.
you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It had
So
been publicly traded since pretty much, I think, since its inception or pretty close to that. It was a different time of public markets because the company would have been founded in 1990, maybe.
okay.
So there was I think the public markets, and it was a whole different landscape back then.
So again, kind of curious about you moving into this role. How are
Yeah.
you feeling? Is it something that you went into feeling very confident? Was there a big ego at the time?
Yeah, I think it's good. I think there was definitely some ego there of like, wow, I'm a CEO and I've arrived. There was that. There was a lot of trepidation as
Yeah.
well. But I I know one thing. I really had a lot of, I knew the industry. I'd been working in this industry for 20 plus years. I knew it was a good company at its heart. I really did believe in it. I believed in the product. And I hated to see it go to waste. I think there was a lot of speculation, even within the ownership and the board of directors and the current management of like, oh, this has just been a slog and we thought we'd win the lawsuit. We really didn't. So um, I was kind of more fresh on the scene, and I had the energy because I felt
Yeah.
we could do it. And really, John, I had little room to fail. It couldn't get much worse. We were losing. I don't know. It was
You didn't have to
over a
do much
billion.
to.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. We were bleeding money in operating cost every month. So I was able to, from an operating perspective, I was able to turn things around. I think relatively quickly, and it's with everything, and it's the people. And I
yeah.
think there were people who were aligned with the previous CEO and the management in that style of management, and decided at this point in time they were going to leave the company. They were going to exit. The CEO left. There were some. I started bringing some of my own team in, some people I had worked with or had trusted that I knew, were aligned with me and that I could trust, and really felt the same way that what we could do with this company. And then, and really, it started with that. It started with getting some of the right people on the leadership team, getting some of the right people in the right places, and some of the people who really didn't want to stay or weren't part of my management philosophy of what I wanted to do with the company, having either tough conversations. I did have a tough
Yeah.
conversation with them, or some of them had what they felt was a tough conversation with me. Either way, it was fine because ultimately, as I've learned then, you need to have the right people with you. They need to be aligned with where you're going, and as a CEO, where one wants to take the company, and it worked. And I think seemed like within about a year and a half, we had the company turned around pretty decently, and really just a very simple strategy. I'll tell you a funny story because you and I work now as coaches with the Metronomic
Yes.
system, and we talk a lot about strategy. And as our CFO came to me one morning and said, Glenn, I have a call with an investor this afternoon, and he wants to talk to you. He wants to know what your strategy is. can you do that? Can you join this call? I'm like, yeah, I can do that. Okay, give me some time to think. And I really I John, I'm like,
Nothing.
as it relates to a grand strategy. But what I did really, true story, is I took a blank sheet of paper and I put 1, 2, 3. And I can't remember exactly what I put, but I put some pretty simple things like, what's our strategy? Well, strategy is to focus on our customers first and
Very
foremost.
customer-centric approach. Yeah.
Exactly. A very customer-centric approach. Support our sales team because they were the people on the front lines. Because really, we needed to drive our top line sales. That's really what had receded. And then we need to cut costs. We need to be efficient with our costs, and anything that wasn't essential to the business, we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And it really was those three things. And I showed up on the call, talked to the investor, and they said, "That's great, excellent." I was like, "Really?"
So these are my 3 priorities. This is what I'm focused on, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then off you go, and you work on those. And I mean, you mentioned you already had the depth and knowledge of the market. There were some changes in the leadership team, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
So those 3 things that we talk about: scalable systems, a really strong, cohesive 8-player leadership team, and that team understands the market dynamics. You had those 3 things in place, or had to go through a process of changing and getting some of those things in place, but the fundamentals were there. And
yes. Yeah, I think that's what it took in a pretty short order. And at that time, you're right, it's what I had. I did it more from an intuitive sense. And I was really fortunate, I think, because the company had come from previously, that CEO had his training at a company like Procter & Gamble, which was very well run by objectives. We did planning, we did annual planning, we did quarterly planning. So I was able to start bringing that into this company. And even just that thinking, I think that, having those 3 priorities as a strategy, even though it wasn't, that innovative, it was really what we needed to focus on. And that from then on, that's what the leadership team and I did, said, anything that's not aligned with these 3 things, we're not doing it.
Gotcha.
And so it really focused and forced a focus for us to focus on our customers. Where could we do the best job for our customers, and support the sales team that was then our front line calling on the customers, and what do they need from us? And then really being efficient from a production manufacturing standpoint.
And that experience you'd had over the years and years before, the decades before, had given you the intuition, although you hadn't sort of had that formal training or been through the coaching process, like scaling up in metronomics around priorities and that sort of thing. That intuition was there, and you knew what you needed to do, went in and just did it.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You turn it around. A year and a half later, everything's starting to go well. What happens next? How long are you there, or was that the end of transformation?
No, because it was a lot of great lessons along the way. But what happened is we were successful. We grew the company significantly, and we were profitable. We fortunately had some of the money that was from the lawsuit left over, so we had cash in the bank. We didn't need to worry about that. But it was a publicly traded company, so there was a lot of politics around that. We had a board of directors who represented the shareholders, and some of them I didn't feel really understood the dynamics of the business of what we did. And there was it's interesting. I don't know how many times, if you've worked in companies or been involved with where there's a lot of competing interests, because anytime you start getting into a lot of money,
half all the time. It's kind of the daily show.
Many people have an opinion, and we had approximately 300 shareholders as a publicly traded company, and many of them had different opinions, and some of them had significant blocks of stock. And ultimately, the kind of 2 things that happened, I think, at the same point in time, is a point in time several years later, we were approached by someone who wanted us to become part of a larger entity that was more of an operating company and be one of the companies below that. There was a couple other occasions within that period, we tried to do some things with the ownership, but we were pretty successful. We took the company from somewhere 16, 17 million up to close to 30 million, 27, 28 million. And we were profitable, successful, but we were kind of stuck there.
Mm.
And
So had you hit a plateau and just kind of got stuck there and
yeah,
just
I
wasn't
think
going to the next
so.
level now? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think a lot of it was because we had one product, pretty much a single product and we were looking to diversify, hadn't yet. And as a CEO, one thing I was trying to do is I was trying to create our next level strategy, the strategy that would take us to the next level, because I could tell we were stuck. I felt stuck. But frankly, John, I really didn't know, I didn't really understand what a next level strategy was. I was really struggling with that, and I was trying to find help with it. And it was during that point in time that a significant amount of the shares got sold, and a group of investors accumulated a significant share of stock. They were able to acquire several seats on the board and basically had a majority on the board of directors, which really gave them the ability to steer the direction of the company.
Okay.
And my vision was that I wanted to be able to use this cash that we had to invest in something that would change the trajectory of the company from a product standpoint. Didn't have that yet. I didn't have a strategy. I didn't have a compelling vision for the future. I really didn't. I kept telling everyone, we're going to be $100 million company. We're going to be $100 million company. But what does that mean? And how was I going to get there? I didn't know. I was really struggling to create that. And meanwhile, these investors were able to come in and basically said, hey, our vision for the future is that we run this to get a lot of cash out of it. And
So that's what they were after.
That's what they were after. Yeah.
Drive up the value and exit it.
Correct.
Or generate
right.
a lot of cash. Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Which is a business strategy.
That
didn't excite me. I really wanted to do something within the industry at a product level, something that would be new and different, innovative, right? And this is maybe where my ego came in. But I felt I could do it. We had taken it this far, and I really thought we could take it to the next level, but I just didn't know how. Didn't have an exciting vision. And ultimately, because they came in, they had the ownership, right? It was the golden rule. And after 8 months of struggle, I left.
Okay, so
which was really
that closes that chapter in your life, but it was a brilliant chapter. And reflecting on what we were sort of saying about Benjamin Hardy, when you look back at these sort of periods of your life where you've 10 times gone through a 10 times transformation, that's essentially what you've done, going from where you were before, going through this process with being the CEO of that company.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the experiences I had were, just there's so many experiences that I would never have envisioned earlier in my life, even a year before that. And I remember, it's going and meeting with investors on Wall Street and sitting down with them and talking about the vision for my company. I mean, literally on Wall Street, talking with investors about buying shares of stock in our company, and working on an assembly line. I would never, ever envision that for my future.
I've never seen your future self as that CEO of that listed company from where you started out on that line. I mean, it's quite remarkable. And you finish up, and the next chapter is becoming a coach.
Yeah. Yep. I did have an interim chapter. Well, the interesting thing is we had started using my company while I was CEO. I had brought in EOS, so the Entrepreneur Operating System. I was in a business CEO group, and everybody said, you should do this. This is great. So we brought in a professional person to help us with that.
And this is the company that you're listed.
That I was CEO of. That I was CEO.
Yeah,
the listed company. Yeah, the company is called Insignia, and we were starting with the EOS process, and it made sense to me because it aligned with the planning process that I had from the company I worked for before. But one of the interesting things is that professional person that came in, they were an implementer, and they helped us install the system, I guess. But for me as a CEO, I didn't get a lot of value out of that personally in my role. And when I left the CEO role, I didn't know what I was going to do. I actually ended up getting approached by some people who wanted me to consult with their companies, help them. They had seen what we were able to do with it with a previous insignia company, and so I started helping them, and they got results from it. And I was really using part of that EOS process, but I was modifying it a bit based on my experience and what we had done. At the same point in time, I started a company in real estate investment and acquired some partners in that, and we were running that business. And then after a couple of years, I started really seeing more success and having more fun with this business consulting aspect than I was in the real estate investment aspect. So I sold that to those partners, learned some lessons in that too about partnerships.
Through that whole exit and partnerships.
All that things, right? But really ultimately said, wow, this is a really, I want to become a business consultant. And it was around that point in time that I got in a conversation with a CEO who encouraged me to look at the scaling up system based on Vern Harnish's book, because he used it in his company. He had a Gazelles coach, which was a coach that would help with scaling up. So I looked at that system, and I was really, really impressed. And what I saw from that scaling up system that the EOS system didn't have was strategy. And I really resonated with that, because at my company, had I had that strategy component, I was searching for that. And I remember reading this book, Scaling Up, on the way to New York. I was going to meet with another CEO, and I was like, why didn't I have this 3 years ago? This would have been great. So that set me down the path to become a scaling up coach. And actually, in my training, to go to my scaling up training a few months later, one of the first people I met was Shannon Susko.
Our coach and mentor and founder of Metronomics.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So that was 6 years ago that I became a scaling up coach. That organization changed, and there was an arm that came off called Gravitas, which had a slightly different system. And Shannon was starting to teach a lot of coaches on what she called the 3HAG system, and then which ended up becoming Metronomics. And a few years ago, I was really impressed with what Shannon was doing with that metronomic system, because it took the strategy component even further, and I think is a much more robust system. And I've really adopted that to use with my clients, as well as the element of what you and I both do, which is also to be there as a coach for the CEO and the leadership team, which is, and for me, ultimately my purpose in doing this is I was a very lonely and frustrated CEO.
Yeah.
And there were some really tough times there. And I didn't have anybody to turn to. I didn't have anyone who could help advise me, who could ask me the tough questions, who I could talk out loud with, that I could trust. And now, as a coach to the CEOs I work with, that's the person I am. And then that's really what drives me and my purpose.
And that's interesting. So you're heading up the CEO of this publicly listed company, but you have that feeling of frustration and loneliness, just as any business owner, entrepreneur, CEO is going to have along the way. And I think is a key sort of characteristic or part of the doom loop that the CEO doom loop that we're going to talk about just now. And maybe this is a good time to transition into that. So you've recently done a piece of research, and you've come up with what you've identified as the CEO doom loop. And for me, I kind of think of my flying days, and we would put the plane into what we called an insip and spin. So you'd kind of pull back until you hear the stall warning go off, hit the hard right rudder, and the singer go over and start spinning towards the ground. And you have to recover for that. And when I think about the CEO doom loop, I kind of think about this practice that we had to do. And I would take vomiting and anti-nausea pills to make sure that I didn't bring up in the whole process. But that was a kind of this doom loop. The way I kind of felt about it was that there is this kind of scariness to it. And so anyway, you do this research, and you've spoken to a number of different companies. Maybe tell us a little bit about what the CEO doom loop is?
Yeah. So the research we did is called the CEO Playbook, and anyone can download it from my website. I
And
collaborated
I'll
with three other.
put it
Put the link down.
into
Yep.
the links as well. Yeah. So we'll make sure
As I
it's in
always
there.
say, link below.
Link it
Um,
down.
and I collaborated with three other coach colleagues of ours on it. Collectively, we interviewed 72 CEOs, and we asked them a standardized set of questions about what were their fears, what were their business issues, what were their fears. I started asking them how much did they think that was costing them in their business, basically these problems they were having. And then started asking them, well, what are your goals? What are your business goals? But also, what are your life goals? What's your purpose? And having that conversation with them, we accumulated all the results, hired an analyst to start looking at these and coding. And really, when we started seeing the problems combined with the fears and seeing the correlations between those, what we saw is that the fear, the CEO, really their head, where their mind is at, as it relates to the problems, that the more they have a fear, they generally start digging in, kind of
Yeah.
retrenching or digging down into the business, going into this place of fear, and it really affects their company and their leadership team. So an example of the doom loop could be, let's say, for example, as a CEO, and I fell into this, business results start to suffer, or there's a problem. And I start looking at that problem, and it's this, someone on the leadership team is not doing well. Okay. As CEO, I start deciding, well, okay, I need to start taking control of the business, right? It's like, I wonder if it's when you're flying, it's like you grip the stick harder, right? Which
You
is
do
probably not the right thing to do,
knuckles down.
right? Yeah, right.
At
You
least
should
when you're
probably
learning.
loosen up your grip, breathe. But no, the doom loop is where we start panicking and we start getting very narrow-minded. And so a CEO in this instance, I see, they'll go in and they'll start doing that leader's job. So instead of pulling back and holding that leader accountable or observing to say, look, you're not doing the right job, I need to bring someone in who is, the CEO says, move out of the way, I'm going to do this. And I did this as CEO. I know I can think of times when we had some major sales presentations that if I was doubtful about the salesperson or the sales leader's ability, I would say, I'm going to work on this one. And I would take over the presentation, which was the wrong thing to do.
Again, I'm curious. Why do you think we do that? Why? I
Yeah.
know. I feel like I've been guilty of that in the past as well. And I see
Mm-hmm.
CEOs around me and business owners around me who appear to be guilty of that as well. Why
Yeah,
is it that
I
I
see it. Well, I see it
kind
a
of
lot.
default?
I think. Well, I think one of the business, there's some common universal business issues is one, lack of communication, just really lack of expectations and vision and where are we going. I think it's lack of accountability as well. And I think those two go together a lot in leadership, is that many of us are afraid of having the tough conversations.
Yeah.
We don't know how to keep people truly accountable, and then we let our fears take a hold of us. Because I think there's another fear of, if someone in a significant role in our company isn't doing their job, how do we find someone who can? And if we let that person go, who's going to do their work? Well,
Yeah.
they're better than, well, we don't know. We don't have the next great person to put in that role. So therefore we kind of suffer with mediocrity. And as a result of that, as leaders, we're basically being mediocre leaders. And I'm pointing at myself because as a CEO, I see plenty of instances where I did that. I
Yeah.
tolerated mediocre results. And as a result, right, I didn't have a truly aligned A-player team, because for the A players on my team, if they saw that I was tolerating a B or a C player on the team, what did that tell them? That I wasn't an A-player CEO. And so this is how the doom loop can actually start becoming a doom loop, because a CEO who isn't an A player, who doesn't know how to hold people accountable or inspire truly great leaders to want to join their team, will continue to have a mediocre team, and then no other great leaders want to be on a mediocre team. Anybody who is great will want to leave. So, and then once they leave, then the CEO further falls into the trap of fears and panic. And that's how
they get into
I
this.
believe. Yeah.
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 I mean, if again, sort of curious about when you're flying that airplane, you pull back on the stick, you get the sound that goes beep beep. You're going into a stall.
Mm-hmm.
So curious about how a CEO can recognize that they're starting to slip into this doom loop. And I think you've identified one of the things there is that if you notice yourself jumping in and trying to take over and say, well, I might as well just do it myself, kind of thing. That certainly seems to be one of them. If you're starting to do that, you know that you're slipping into the doom loop.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the other things that CEOs need to be watching out for?
Yeah, I think that's number one. The number one, you put your finger on it, is that as a CEO, am I jumping back in? Am I feeling I need to do this? I think another telltale sign is looking at your team, looking across your senior leadership team as a CEO, and saying, is everybody truly performing at the level that I expect them to perform at? And are they a cultural fit for our company? So that's critically important, in the constant evaluation against that across the entire senior leadership team. Because as a company grows, the CEO has to grow and the leadership team has to grow in their own capabilities. And they have to grow, their capabilities need to grow faster than the growth of the company.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have both seen what happens when the company's growth exceeds that capacity is it'll start to plummet, right? And that's the doom loop. You'll see where it will come back, and many times the CEO gets replaced. Many companies, right? Or the company, that gets sold, or the company fails, and so many people are like, well, they blame it on the market, they blame it on this. But ultimately, I would go back to say, so many times when companies fail, falter, it really is because of the CEO, the person who's in that seat.
So I think if I remember your model, there's the overall sort of leadership capacity and the ability for that leadership team to grow and to be able to grow
Mm-hmm.
at a pace that is faster than the growth of the company. But there was also sales effectiveness in that
Mm-hmm.
model.
Yes.
How does sales effectiveness kind of fit into what we're talking about in the doom loop? And because it stood out for me as we could have talked about operational effectiveness, but sales effectiveness stood out as quite a big one in that model.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Jean, let me ask you, because you know that we use the key function flow map as one of the diagnostics, right? It's one of the tools in metronomics. And so we'll map out first and foremost, right? Here's your prospective client. Then there's marketing. Then there's sales. Then there's operations. Then there's finance. So what else do we map out is who is the senior leader accountable for each one of those functions? And what is, first and foremost, one of the critical business functions in a company? Sales. Right? Obviously, marketing is as well, but ultimately sales is that critical function. And it's also one of the highest paid functions in a company. And I don't know what you and your experience, but I know from my experience, many times that's where entrepreneurial CEOs who've come up through the company, they've primarily been the sales drivers in their company.
Yes.
And they can sell their product better than anybody else. They know it better. They have all the relationships. But once a company starts growing and scaling, they cannot be personally accountable for the sales. So therefore, when a company starts faltering as it's growing, I think many times it's because it's lack of truly great sales leadership talent, which then goes back to the CEO saying, well, it's really sales effectiveness, but ultimately it's leadership effectiveness.
Yeah. For those listening who don't, the term KFFM is the key function flow map. So we look at the key functions within a business and we map those out. And then, as Glenn was saying, we take a look at who is accountable for each of those functions. And this is where I guess the sales effectiveness comes in a play. You're right. Most business owners are the person who's kind of carrying the function, the sales function, and the business gets to a point where that function needs to be taken over by somebody else, as the CEO is lifting themselves out to be doing the job that that CEO should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm glad you saw that, because that's, I think, the point many people miss. And I think one of the things we've discovered in all those interviews is that many CEOs are really quick to point to outside factors. So it's the sales leader, it's the market, it's this thing. And very few of them are really good at saying it's this person right here in the corner office.
yeah, pointing the finger back at them and looking at,
Mm-hmm.
and that fundamentally has to change before the company's going to pull out of that stall, out of that plateau, and kind of find
Mm-hmm.
the escape velocity. I mean, you felt it yourself, I guess, when you got to that 30 million.
Yep.
There's this, what's the vision? That where are we going, and how do we find the escape velocity to take us to the next level? And there's some
Mm-hmm.
hard decisions to be made there. We sort of think about what got us to where we are now may not be where we sort of what gets
Right.
us to the next level. And I guess I was wondering, can a leadership, I mean, we talk about growing the leadership team at the same pace, but are there
Mm-hmm.
points where you actually have to change the leadership? They aren't going to be able to grow beyond the 30 million to take it to 100 million. Or can we grow the leadership team working with coaches like ourselves to have a leadership team that actually does grow faster than the growth of the business? Is that something you've
Yeah.
observed before?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because I would say sometimes it can be some of the same team members. And it really depends upon what's the vision for the company? What is their personal vision? What do they want to do? And are they willing to grow, to learn, to change, to become that next generation leader as the company goes from company 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0? And many times when I meet, especially when I first start working with a company, I'll have a pretty candid discussion to say, like, look, some of you probably won't be here two to 3 years
Yeah.
from now. And many times, because in the work that we do with companies, John, is that it's uncovering what is the vision, where are we going, and the purpose and the core values. And many times, even just once that becomes very visible, some people say, that's not what I signed up for. That's not the place I want to go to, or that's not the purpose I share with this company. And they choose to leave. And other times we have to have some difficult conversations with people because they don't have the capacity to take it to the next level.
Yeah. I find that a lot of CEOs struggle with this fluffy stuff, the
Mm-hmm.
vision, the core values. I had a conversation with a CEO not long ago who'd come out of, I think, SAP, and said, stuff's up on the walls and it's just rubbish. Nobody actually lives to them.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably one of the hardest sort of things that a CEO needs to come to grips with, I guess, to pull out of the doom loop, is that there's the softer side of the business. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talked about not having a purpose to take you from the 30 million to the 100 million and trying to figure that
Mm-hmm.
purpose out when you were the CEO.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the softer side and how it
Yeah.
fits
I
into the
think
doom loop?
there's, we in Metronomics, we talk about the hard edge and the soft edge. And there's one of the slides that we use in our presentations where the 3HAG, the 3-year highly achievable goal, ties those two together. And ultimately, it shows a pretty even balance between the soft side and the hard edge, the soft edge and the hard edge, right? Which is the people. And it is the people is tying everyone together under those core values and the purpose. They believe in the vision there. And then we actually are managing and growing and investing in these people. We're setting clear expectations of how they can contribute to the business, what success looks like for each one of them. And then as leaders, we're spending time with these people, holding them accountable, helping them grow. We're coaching them, and which is really a really next level leadership skill that so many business leaders who are very comfortable with the hard edge are not comfortable with.
Yeah.
And we actually saw this in the doom loop analysis. It helped lead us to the doom loop, is that many CEOs said they weren't comfortable with the people side of the business, or they didn't like the people side of the business. And we actually saw a correlation with that.
That percent was quite high, if I remember right. They were saying like 60% and around just dealing with alignment and people issues, and CEOs are withdrawing from this, and they're just saying, and just to clarify, this piece of research, if I'm not mistaken, was done on companies from 2 million to 200 million. So we're talking about quite a variety of different
broad range.
sort of stages of business. And there were different statistics, but at the top end, there was sort of 60% and I think 50%. But the CEOs were withdrawing from dealing with some of the key people issues, struggle hiring the right people, getting the right people onto the team. That was really interesting. And it's a critical success factor.
It really is. Yeah. So many times, many times it's a difficult realization for that CEO. Like, is that CEO the right person to be leading the company? And I think another is that I think many CEOs don't really understand truly what their role is. And especially in the companies in the lower mid-market, where many of them are still founder-led or entrepreneur-led. They've had success growing it to a point. But I think that's another point where they get stuck, is not really understanding what is that transition from working in the business to working on the business.
So again, I'm curious in your mind, and being a coach, and what is the CEO's job? If you're sort of talking to the audience now, what's the CEO's job? And
well, I think it's first and foremost, it's having a vision. It's really having a culture and a vision for a company, communicating it really well. So being, as our colleague Brad Giles would say, the ambassador for your company, both internally and externally.
Over and over when you say very well.
I had a CEOs ask me, well, how do I know when I've said it enough? And I say, when it starts echoing back at you and it's
love it.
correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I think that's a big thing that they miss, is we write down a vision and core values and all those kind of things, and maybe they get stuck up on the wall, but that communication is just missing most of the time. So
and embedding the core values into everything a company does. Every decision, hiring and firing, should be based on core values, and every performance discussion, positive and negative, should be based on core values. And performance management, and even the teams, 50% of that should be on their culture and core values. Are they a cultural fit? Are they the right people? And do they understand what their job is, and are they performing in it? Right.
Yeah.
So hire for culture, train for skills.
So if you are a business owner of a $2 million, £2 million, £3 million, £5 million business, part of your job as that CEO is the softer side, and you've got to come to terms with that. And this is going to be key to kind of staying away from slipping into that doom loop.
I think the next part is also one of the critical job functions or the accountabilities for CEO is building and growing an A-player cohesive leadership team. That's not easy to do. It's not easy at all. That's critical. And definitely the strategy, leading the strategic discussion. And actually, for the CEOs I work with, I encourage them to have one of their critical accountabilities is that the one-page strategic plan is updated and held to. So the one-page strategic plan within Metronomics, or the one-page plan, it has all the business metrics on it. It has the 1 year, the quarterly highly achievable goal, the 1 year highly achievable goal, the 3 year highly achievable goal, and the big, hairy, audacious goal. And
And it
so
all
really
lines up.
it all lines up. And
Yeah.
the top priorities for the company are listed there. So if a CEO truly is focused on their accountability is ensuring that everything contained within that one-page plan is met, their company will be a huge success. But they can't do it alone. They have to build a team, very competent team of A players, hold them accountable, and so that those leaders are then holding the people below them accountable, and then coaching, coaching for higher performance.
So what happens? You register that you've slipped into the doom loop. Again, with the airplane example, is kind of stop the spin, full power, pull out, and off we go. What's the sequence? What is a CEO that has registered that I'm slipping into this doom loop? I'm kind of leaning into doing things I shouldn't be doing, or leaning out of things I should be kind of leaning into.
Yeah.
What do they do?
Call air traffic control.
Mayday.
Right, Mayday. Right. Here's I don't know who originated this, but I really believe it. I think that every successful CEO needs to have some kind of business framework plan. Okay, so that's first and foremost. You need to have the business. If you have as a CEO, you need to have a one-page plan. Okay, because that's like your instrument panel. That will tell you if you're slipping into the doom loop, right? I think as a CEO should always have a peer group, because it is a lonely and frustrating place, and you should always have a group of other trusted CEOs who understand and get it. And then you should also have a coach. Every high performer has a coach. The Olympics are coming up, right?
Yeah, right. In
Right.
Paris.
And what does every high performing athlete have on the sidelines? A coach. And so every CEO needs those three things. And so when I said call air traffic control, Mayday, call a coach, right?
Call a coach.
Also, if you're in that peer group, your peer group can help you spot that. And I think as a CEO, you need to have these trusted advisors, and you need to listen to them, right?
Yeah.
Challenge them. Don't just do what they say, but when they're challenging you, be comfortable with being open and vulnerable, and rising to those challenges and answering those questions honestly, and trying as best you can to not let your ego answer those questions, but really be able to step back and take some reasoned look, because ultimately it's whatever business a CEO thinks they're actually in the people business, and they're a person. And so they need to have the right people around them from an advisory standpoint, but also the right people on their team that are executing the plays to win the game, the vision for their business.
That's a really good point. It's not just about having the team. As you were saying, you have these feelings of loneliness as a CEO. There are ways that you can surround yourself with other people, be it a coach, peer groups, all sorts of different perspectives that can help to kind of keep an eye on the instruments with you and what's going on around you, just that situational awareness of what's going on, and that you can have those conversations with and go and sort of plot your own course, but take that information and use it to have you do so you're not feeling lonely. And I think part of the loneliness is actually building that group, whether it's the leadership team or those people around you that you can actually be vulnerable with. Because I think as CEOs, we feel like we can't be vulnerable, and you want to have those vulnerable conversations. And as the leadership team kind of the cohesiveness builds, part of that is being able to not feel as lonely as a CEO and to be able to have those vulnerable conversations.
Yep. Yeah. There you go.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for joining us, Glenn. Yeah. What are you reading at the moment? I mean, talk about learning. What are you learning at the moment? What are you reading?
Actually, I'm reading one book from our friend Dr. Benjamin Hardy, Your Future Self Now, and I'm actually rereading that kind of going back through and really looking for myself as to say, what is my next 10x step, and planning that move.
And how are you applying it with the clients that you're coaching? Are you starting to introduce some of that 10x, that transformational kind of impossible goal stuff?
Exactly. Yeah, I am. We were really, I'm asking them serious questions. I'm encouraging them to read the 10X is easier than 2X, and asking them questions of where do they see their next move. And also the challenging question of what if you made your BHAG your 3HAG and your 3HAG
Yeah.
your 1HAG? What would that look like? What would it require you do? But I think a real important point I like about it is what can't you do or shouldn't you do?
What are you
Because
saying
that's
no
a
to,
that's a
right? Yeah.
yeah, what are you saying no to? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
difficult, but that's ultimately what will set us free to be able to work on the highest level activities for ourselves and our business.
Yeah. I'm working with two teams at the moment, and a quarterly about a week ago, I did the same thing with them. It said, imagine if we brought your 3HAG down to 1HAG and your BHAG down to your
Hmm.
3HAG. And I loved how the CEO's face just lit up and like, okay, wait, everybody's got a blank piece of paper. Let's rethink this. And
Hmm.
the energy that came with kind of thinking about what could be an impossible goal. How might we achieve this if we just took away all the constraints at the moment and rethought this?
Hmm.
And another team
Yeah.
just saying no to things. They kind of canned a whole priority that they thought was important, said, no, these are the three things that we've got to focus on. And so I'm also really enjoying Dr. Hardy's work and following rapid transformation at the moment. He's kind of running a
Hmm.
program while we're waiting for the book to come out, which has been really good as well. So, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. I did. Yeah, I was going to point out, I had a client just 2 weeks ago where one of the things as a leadership team, after going through those questions and the planning, is we emerged from the planning session with just three. Basically, they had set up, I believe, 7 or 8 priorities for this year. And so halfway through the year, after going through that thinking, correct, I know, right? They
Like
said,
if you got
nope,
more than three.
yes. So they pared it down to three,
Okay.
and three only. And the three critical that if they accomplish those three, it will truly elevate their company to the next level. Is it pretty exciting?
It is. I think the work he's done is phenomenal. I'm really enjoying introducing it to clients.
Yeah.
What about getting in touch with you? What's the best place for people to get in touch with you? Is it LinkedIn,
Yeah.
website?
Yep.
We'll stick them all in
I'm
the
on
show notes
LinkedIn.
below.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, on LinkedIn, and also we Apex North Business Coaching is the name of our practice, and apexnorthcoaching.com is our website URL. The playbook can be downloaded there, but I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me there.
Perfect.